Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.
The Black October Archive is one of those cases where the boundary between political secrecy and pure myth becomes impossible to separate, because every new detail only deepens the hole instead of filling it. According to the most persistent accounts, a set of folders labeled Special Importance surfaced in the early 2010s among collectors of declassified materials, supposedly containing transcripts of private negotiations during the 1993 crisis, negotiations that the official record claims never took place. Those who briefly handled the folders describe the same thing: typed pages with abrupt blackout marks that don't match government redaction patterns, dates written in two different calendar styles, and side notes scribbled by someone who clearly wasn't part of the official investigative team. Even stranger, the copies briefly circulated online before disappearing within hours, leaving behind only screenshots of screenshots, low-resolution fragments that show phrases like "secondary directive acknowledged" and "line interference due to unregistered participant." The original files were said to be stored in a sealed evidence room belonging to a special commission, dissolved in the late 90s, but the key inventory logs for that room were rewritten 3 separate times, each version contradicting the last. Several experts brought in to review the authenticity of the leaked scans later withdrew their comments, claiming they had been mistaken about the provenance. A few witnesses connected to the investigation vanished from public access entirely: retired officers who suddenly moved abroad without forwarding addresses, analysts who deleted decades of professional records, and one archivist who reportedly said he had seen something inserted into the chain after the fact, before refusing to speak again. Even the surviving documents show odd structural anomalies, margins inconsistent with government typewriters of the era, timestamps formatted like military teletypes but generated through unknown equipment, and dialogue patterns suggesting that at least one speaker was removed from the transcript retroactively. The most unsettling part is a recurring notation reading CO Shift R17, a labeling system not used in any Russian government department. Researchers suspect it corresponds either to a classified internal channel or an operator designation for off-grid communication lines. Whatever the case, the Black October Archive operates like a gravitational void in historical records. Everything around it bends, contradicts itself, or disappears outright. And the few people who claim to have seen full versions of the folders all repeat nearly the same sentence, as if rehearsed or genuinely terrified. The transcripts weren't documenting an event, they were documenting a correction. Researchers who attempted to reconstruct the chain of custody for the Black October Archive quickly ran into patterns that felt less like bureaucratic chaos and more like intentional scrambling. Every official inquiry path ends in a different dead end. One file points to a retired colonel who denies ever signing the attached paperwork. Another leads to a storage facility that burned down in 2000 with no investigation. And a third references a commission whose name doesn't appear in any government registry. The surviving scans show subtle clues of manipulation: ink density that changes mid-line, inconsistent line spacing, and brackets added in a style typical for intelligence annotation rather than civilian investigative notes. One leaked page contains a timestamp rewritten 3 times in different pressure levels, as if someone tried to disguise the original but didn't know what the replacement should be. People familiar with internal procedures say the strangest element is the presence of a cross-channel authorization code, a thing used only when multiple agencies access the same encrypted feed. That alone suggests the transcripts captured communications from a system that officially did not exist in 1993. Several witnesses who previously hinted at knowledge of the archive later issued retractions that read almost identical, repeating phrases like "initial assessment invalid" and "source context compromised." Critics assume it's coordinated damage control, but believers argue it's the result of pressure from entities outside the known chain of command. Even stranger, metadata hidden in the leaked screenshots shows an editing signature used by a discontinued workstation model produced exclusively for a defense subcontractor. No civilian office had access to those machines. The question that haunts researchers is simple: why would anyone rewrite, suppress, or fragment documents that supposedly correspond to non-existent negotiations? The working theory is that the transcripts might reveal not what happened during the crisis, but who was truly giving instructions, and from where. Attempts to trace the earliest mentions of the Black October Archive on internal networks uncovered an unusual pattern. All known references originate from a cluster of servers, tied to emergency response coordination, not political oversight. Former technicians say this indicates the materials were first flagged not by investigators but by operators monitoring encrypted interagency traffic during the crisis. That alone supports a long-standing rumor that an unknown party was transmitting on a frequency reserved for top-tier continuity of government protocols. The surviving transcript snippets hint at someone issuing directives that bypass the official chain of command, with lines like, "Maintain separation protocol," and "Acknowledge external confirmation," suggesting a second authority operating parallel to the recognized hierarchy. Digital forensics teams, who studied the leaked screenshots, noted that several pages include alignment marks, used only during duplication on classified optical copiers, meaning the copies were at some point physically reproduced within a black budget facility. To researchers who spoke about this publicly reported being contacted by individuals claiming to represent an archival compliance unit, except no such unit exists within the National Archive structure. Meanwhile, a former analyst stated anonymously that the archive included references to layered event modeling, a technique used when assessing outcomes of actions that haven't yet occurred, essentially predictive crisis mapping. This raises the disturbing possibility that the mysterious transcripts weren't documenting conversations from October 1993 at all, but simulations fed into the system by an external operator, later mistaken for real communications amid the chaos. If that's true, then the investigation team might have unknowingly handled data that blended factual events and injected scenarios, making the archive both sensitive and deeply unstable as evidence. The biggest unresolved question remains the same across every leak, testimony, and contested file. Why were multiple agencies treating a set of supposedly fictional transcripts as if they posed an ongoing national security threat? Over time, researchers noticed that mentions of the Black October archive tended to surface in cycles, almost as if someone was periodically testing public awareness. Every few years, a new file would appear, a blurry scan of a transcript margin, a cropped photograph of a folder label, or an audio clip containing only static and faint tones. These fragments always spread quickly, triggering waves of speculation, and then vanished just as fast, removed by takedown requests attributed to agencies that denied issuing them. One digital historian tracked the hash signatures of these files, and found that most shared an identical manipulation pattern, suggesting they were all processed through the same proprietary toolset that only a few classified labs have access to. More unsettling. Some fragments included glyphs resembling indexing codes used in deep storage repositories that catalog materials considered too destabilizing for public release. Whistleblowers claimed that during the original investigation, analysts encountered discrepancies in the timestamps so severe that they couldn't determine whether certain communications happened before, during, or after the 1993 crisis. One anomaly showed a directive logged at a time when the monitoring station was offline for maintenance, meaning the signal had to originate from an unregistered relay. Another fragment referred to compliance thresholds being exceeded, implying a pre-existing protocol to handle unauthorized communications. As archivists tried to make sense of these clues, they found that multiple document sets appeared to contradict each other while still referencing the same event markers, creating a mosaic of half-truths. This led to the theory that the archive was deliberately mixed with fabricated segments to obscure which parts were real. But if so, the question becomes, who would benefit from burying authentic transcripts beneath layers of noise? Some investigators believe the archive captured operational interference from a covert entity attempting to steer crisis response through illicit channels. Others think the transcripts documented an internal power struggle, too damaging to reveal. The most extreme theory suggests the signals weren't human at all but originated from an automated system, designed to activate only under specific national emergencies. Regardless of the explanation, everyone who has studied the surviving fragments agrees on one thing: the Black October archive wasn't merely suppressed, it was engineered to be unsolvable, a puzzle whose missing pieces were removed with surgical precision, so no one could ever reconstruct the full picture. Attempts to trace the physical origin of the archive led investigators to a decommissioned storage site on the outskirts of Bryansk, a location that once handled classified media transfers during the early 2000s. According to internal logs, a pallet registered under an anonymized code was delivered there in 2004 and marked for conditional indefinite holding, a designation used when the contents are sensitive but lack verifiable provenance. When researchers tried to access the pallet a decade later, they discovered the storage slot empty and the chain of custody records overwritten with a generic disposal entry. The disposal timestamp matched a period when the facility's security cameras were offline due to a scheduled firmware update, though no one could produce documentation showing who authorized it. One former technician recalled seeing boxes labeled in an unusually cautious manner. Instead of standard case numbers, they used geometric symbols and colored tags that don't correspond to any known archival system. This gave rise to a theory that the Black October archive was handled by a compartmentalized team operating outside the typical classification tree, possibly part of a crisis contingency network that no longer officially exists. Further complicating the story, a recently surfaced memo allegedly written by a senior analyst mentions that some transcripts responded unpredictably during optical digitization, suggesting the materials contained embedded data invisible to casual inspection. Experts in steganography pointed out that marginal smudges on certain scans could be microencodings, designed to store metadata or routing instructions. If true, then the archive wasn't just documenting communications. It may have been part of a system that transmitted operational cues during the crisis. The idea that an external channel might have been influencing national decision-making alarms even long-retired intelligence officers, some of whom privately admit they were instructed never to reference cross-phase interference in their reports, a phrase suspiciously similar to one found in the leaked transcripts. The most disturbing detail, however, remains the alleged off-record testimony from an investigator who claimed that, while reviewing the documents, he encountered two versions of the same transcript, one clearly human-written, and another that appeared algorithmically generated, as if shadowing the conversation in real time. This duality raises the terrifying possibility that the archive isn't just a remnant of a past crisis, but evidence of an unseen system monitoring, predicting, or even shaping events from behind the curtain. The final known wave of leaks related to the Black October archive came from an unexpected source, an estate sale in Prague, where a private collector purchased a battered metal case containing reels of magnetic tape and several unlabeled envelopes. The seller claimed the items belonged to a deceased diplomat, who often traveled through Moscow during the early 90s. When archivists digitized the tapes, they found low-frequency pulses interspersed with segments of heavily distorted speech. Audio engineers identified timing patterns consistent with secure teleconferencing systems used during high-level emergencies, but the voice signatures didn't match any known political or military figures of the era. One segment featured a calm monotone repeating, "Verify continuity layer," a phrase that doesn't appear in any public crisis management manual but mirrors terminology from the leaked transcript fragments. The envelopes contained photocopies of documents, with portions redacted by hand, not machine, suggesting someone removed details in haste. Among the pages was a reference to secondary authorization bodies, implying decision-making structures parallel to official institutions. After the find became public, multiple researchers involved reported receiving anonymous emails, warning them that the materials were misclassified artifacts and should be returned. However, no agency took responsibility for the warnings. Phantom bureaucracies, unofficial oversight networks, and rogue communication channels all appear intertwined in this case, creating an opaque web that defies conventional explanation. Some theorists now believe the archive represents an experiment in decentralized command, tested during a moment of national chaos, and subsequently erased due to catastrophic failure. Others think it was an accidental glimpse into a hidden infrastructure that still exists, silently observing and waiting. Whatever the truth, the Black October archive stands as one of the most perplexing shadows in modern history, a fragmented record of signals, orders, and voices that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, leaving behind only enough evidence to confirm one chilling fact: someone was speaking during those critical hours, someone with authority, someone who shouldn't have been there at all.
Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.